You know that feeling when someone asks you where you live and you say you rent, and there's this tiny pause, this almost invisible half second where you can feel what they're thinking, like you haven't quite figured things out yet, like renting is something you do on the way to real life, not real life itself. And the weird part is, you've internalized it too. Somewhere in the back of your head, there's this quiet voice that says, I should be buying by now. You're in your late 20s, maybe early 30s, you have a decent job, you're doing okay. And every time a coworker mentions their mortgage, or your parents ask about your plans, or you scroll past a "we bought our first home" post, that voice gets a little louder. So you start looking. You open Zillow late on a Sunday night. You're doing the math, down payment, monthly payment, what you'd need to save, how long it would take, and something in your chest tightens. Not excitement, more like obligation, like you're supposed to want this, like not buying means you're behind. But here's what nobody is actually saying out loud. In a lot of situations, for a lot of people right now, renting is the smarter financial decision, not a consolation prize, not a temporary holding pattern, the smarter move. And the math, when you actually run it honestly, is not even close. My name's Peter, and if you've ever felt quietly pressured to buy a home before you were actually ready, or just wanted to understand what the numbers really say without the cultural guilt, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because there's an invisible threshold in this rent versus buy decision that completely changes the calculation, and almost nobody talks about it.
So let's start with the version of homeownership that everyone sells you. You're making $70,000 a year. After taxes, that's about $4,300 a month hitting your account. You've been renting for a few years, paying $1,600 a month for a decent one-bedroom, and people keep telling you that's money down the drain. You're paying someone else's mortgage. You've heard it 100 times. So you start looking at buying. You find a house, a reasonable house, not a mansion, not a starter shack, a solid 2-bedroom in a mid-sized city, listed at $320,000. Okay, so you need a down payment. The standard advice is 20% to avoid private mortgage insurance. That's $64,000. Just sit with that number for a second. $64,000. If you're saving $500 a month after all your current expenses, and that's aggressive, that's over 10 years just to get to the down payment. Or maybe not quite 10 years, but you're looking at 5, 6, 7 years of serious discipline before you can even begin the process. But let's say you have it. You've saved it. You're ready. Here's what happens next. The mortgage. On a $256,000 loan at current interest rates, let's say 7%, your monthly payment is about $1,700. That's the principal and interest. That already sounds close to your rent, right? Almost even. Maybe a little more. Not crazy. Except it's not $1,700. Property taxes. On a $320,000 home, depending on your state and county, you're paying somewhere around $350 a month. That's $4,200 a year just in taxes. You're at $2,750. Homeowner's insurance, $120 a month. You're at $2,170. Private mortgage insurance, if your down payment was less than 20%. Let's say you only had $40,000. That's 12.5% down at $160 a month. You're at $2,330. And now the one that nobody puts in the headline number, maintenance. The general rule of thumb, and it's pretty consistent, is 1% of the home's value per year in maintenance costs. On a $320,000 home, that's $3,200 a year, $267 a month. That's not a crisis. That's just normal ownership. A water heater that needs replacing, a roof that needs repair over time, an HVAC system. It adds up. You're at $2,600. You went from paying $1,600 in rent to paying $2,600 in actual total housing costs. That's $1,000 more per month, $12,000 more per year for a house that's pretty much equivalent to where you were living. And here's the part that is almost never said directly. In the first years of a mortgage, the vast majority of your payment is interest, not equity. In year one of that $256,000 loan, you're paying roughly $1,490 a month in interest, and only about $210 going toward actual equity. So out of that $1,700 payment, $210 is building equity. The rest is gone, just like rent, except rent was $400 less per month. The equity argument, at least you're building something, only really kicks in later, and it doesn't account for the $12,000 a year you're spending above what rent would cost. Most people think the rent versus buy decision is obvious. Renting is wasteful. Buying builds wealth. End of story. That's what parents say, what financial advice columns say, what culture says. That's not the full picture.
Here's what's actually happening, and why it's more complicated than anyone admits. When you buy a home, you make a very large, very illiquid bet on one asset in one specific geographic location, $320,000 tied up in a single property in a single city. And the assumption baked into buying is always better is that home values will appreciate meaningfully, consistently, and faster than your alternatives. Sometimes that's true. In certain cities over certain periods, home values have absolutely made people wealthy. But here's the thing, that's not guaranteed. And in many mid-sized markets, home values over the last 30 years have appreciated at roughly the rate of inflation, maybe 3% to 4% a year. That sounds okay, except it doesn't account for the extra $1,000 per month you're spending in total costs above renting. It doesn't account for the transaction costs when you eventually sell, real estate agent fees, closing costs. That's 6% to 8% of the sale price. On a $320,000 house, that's $20,000 to $25,000 gone the moment you close. So let's run the actual comparison, honestly. Two people, same income, $70,000 a year, same city. One buys the $320,000 house. One keeps renting at $1,600 a month and invests the $1,000 monthly difference, the money they're not spending on extra ownership costs, into a basic index fund. Over 5 years, that $1,000 a month invested grows to roughly $70,000. Over 10 years, it's about $175,000. Over 20 years, over $600,000. Meanwhile, the homeowner has built equity, maybe $60,000 to $80,000 in equity over 10 years through principal payments, assuming modest appreciation, plus whatever the house has appreciated. But they've also spent $120,000 more in total housing costs over that decade, and they still have closing costs, agent fees, and capital gains considerations when they sell. The numbers are not as lopsided as the culture suggests. In many scenarios, especially for people who might move within 5 to 7 years, or who are in high-cost cities, or who don't have a stable 20% down payment, renting and investing the difference is the mathematically stronger position. But here's the psychological thing that makes this so hard to see. It's called the ownership illusion, and it works on almost everyone. When you own a home, it feels like wealth. It's physical, it's real. You can walk through it, paint the walls, plant things in the yard. You can see it. When your house goes from $320,000 to $350,000 on Zillow, you feel wealthier, even though you can't access that money without selling, and even though you've spent more than that difference in total costs. When you rent and invest, the wealth is invisible. It's a number on a brokerage account. You can't walk through it. You can't show it to your parents. Nobody posts, "We hit $175,000 in our index fund" on social media. So it doesn't feel like the same thing, even though mathematically it can be worth considerably more. Your brain anchors on the physical, visible, tangible asset. The invisible portfolio doesn't scratch the same psychological itch, and so the homeowner feels rich, even when the math says otherwise, and the renter feels behind, even when they're ahead. That illusion is expensive. It costs people years of premature buying, stretched thin, house poor, with no financial flexibility, owning a home they couldn't really afford because the culture told them renting was failure. You know what house poor looks like. It's Sunday afternoon and you need a new water heater, $1,100, and you're staring at your bank account knowing that repair wipes out 2 months of savings. You're a homeowner, you built equity, but your shoulders are tight and you can't sleep right, and you're doing that math again because you're stretched. Meanwhile, the person who's still renting, who everyone's quietly felt sorry for, has $40,000 in savings and invests every month, and can move to a different city in 60 days if a better opportunity shows up. No agent fees, no closing costs, no 6-month sales process, just options. Mobility is a financial asset that nobody puts in the rent versus buy calculation. Your ability to take a job in a different city, to move to a lower cost of living area, to downsize when it makes sense. That flexibility has real dollar value, and homeownership costs you that flexibility completely for as long as you own.
So here's how financially intelligent people actually think about this decision. And I want to be really clear. Some of them do buy homes. It's not that buying is always wrong. It's that they make the decision with actual numbers, not with cultural pressure. When they're considering buying, they're asking, how long am I planning to stay in this specific city? Because if the answer is less than 5 years, the math almost never works. Closing costs and transaction fees take 3 to 5 years just to break even against renting. They're asking, what's my total monthly cost of ownership, all in, not just the mortgage, everything. And then they're comparing that honestly to what renting would cost and what they do with the difference.
They're asking, does buying this home actually serve my life right now? Or am I buying it because I feel like I'm supposed to? And here's the key thing. When they do buy, they buy with a real down payment at a price that keeps their total housing costs genuinely manageable in a city they actually plan to stay. Not out of obligation, not because everyone else is doing it, because it makes sense for their specific situation right now. And when the numbers don't work, when the city is expensive, when they're not sure about staying, when the down payment would drain their financial cushion, they rent, without guilt, without the feeling of being behind, because they know what the real math says. Here's what changes when you make the housing decision based on numbers instead of social pressure. You stop carrying that low hum of financial anxiety that comes from being stretched beyond what's comfortable, that tightness in your shoulders when you open your bank account. It loosens. You keep your options open. Your career, your location, your life trajectory, none of it is locked to a zip code. You can say yes to things. You can move toward better opportunities instead of being anchored to a single asset. And maybe most importantly, you stop making one of the biggest financial decisions of your life based on what people at dinner parties think of you. Now, let me be honest about something. This isn't the message people want to hear. Renting doesn't feel like winning. You can't host a housewarming party. You can't show your parents the yard. There's no moment of arrival. But here's what strategic renting, done right, with the difference actually invested, actually does over time. It builds real, liquid, flexible wealth that you control entirely. Wealth that isn't tied to one market, one neighborhood, one property. Wealth that doesn't require an agent to access. And the person who buys because they felt they were supposed to, who stretches thin and goes house poor and has no financial flexibility for a decade, they look successful. Great house, great neighborhood, posting the key photo, but they can't sleep right. They're doing math on Sunday nights. They're one broken appliance away from a problem. So here's the thing about renting versus buying. It's not actually about which is universally better. It's about which is right for your specific numbers, your specific timeline, your specific life, not the timeline culture assigned to you. Most people buy because they're supposed to, because renting feels like standing still, because the cultural pressure is relentless and the ownership illusion is powerful. But once you actually run the numbers, once you see that renting and investing the difference can build more wealth than many real-world scenarios, the decision stops being about pride or arrival or what anyone thinks. It becomes just math. And the math doesn't care about the housewarming party. The question isn't whether you own or rent. The question is whether the decision you're making actually serves your financial future, or just makes you look like you have it figured out, while quietly making it harder to actually get there. Thanks for watching.